All right, let's jump into another deep dive. Today, we're taking a look at video podcasting. And we've got this really interesting article here all about how much it's blowing up. Um, if you're already in the podcasting world,
Yeah,
it's kind of a big question, right? Like, should you be doing video? Should you not be doing
it's a
video?
big one.
We're going to unpack that today.
It really is fascinating to see how it's like changing the landscape of podcasting. Like even a few years ago, it was kind of that niche little thing, but now it's becoming so mainstream. And this article does a great job highlighting some of the reasons for that shift. And it's not just about trends, there are real strategic reasons to be thinking about video.
Yeah, and that's where I like that we can kind of go past just the trends and really try to understand why things are happening.
Yeah.
So I guess, first let's define things. What exactly is video podcasting? Like, how is it different from, just making a regular video?
That's a good question because, on the surface, it might seem obvious, but there's actually more to it than just, turning the camera on yourself while you're talking. I mean, fundamentally, it's about delivering audio content, but it's adding that extra layer of visuals on top of it. And those visuals can, they can look like a lot of different things.
Okay, so it's not just one type of, one format for video podcasts. What are some of the ways people are using video?
Yeah, there are a bunch of different ways. This article talks about if you've got your kind of classic talking head style,
Hmm.
which is really great for creating that kind of personal connection. People can see your expressions and all that.
Right,
But
right.
then you've also got screen recordings, which are perfect if you're doing like tutorials or presentations where you're
Oh,
walking people through something visually.
that makes sense. So it's kind of picking the format that makes the most sense
Exactly.
for the type of content and, your audience and stuff. Were there any other formats that this article mentioned?
Yeah, interviews were a big one. Being able to see the guest, like their reactions and body language, it adds so much more to the conversation. It can make it way more engaging and dynamic.
Yeah, for sure.
And then there's also behind the scenes content, which I think is really great for, building community and showing like the personality behind your podcast.
Oh, that's cool. It seems like there's so much flexibility there. But why is video podcasting like getting so popular now? Is it just because people are watching more video online in general?
I mean, that's definitely a factor, but the article goes a little deeper into the reasons behind it all. And, one of the key reasons is this potential for increased engagement. Studies have shown that people actually retain more information when they're watching and listening versus just listening alone.
So it's not just like entertainment. It can actually help people like remember stuff better.
Yeah, exactly. And that ties into another reason, which is that it creates stronger connections with the audience. I mean, you're putting a face to the voice, and it just makes for a much more human and relatable experience. It builds trust and, you know, people are more likely to stick around.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of like, if you read a book versus going and seeing the author at a book reading or something,
Yeah,
there's something about seeing the person and their passion and
exactly.
hearing their voice that just makes it,
Absolutely.
well,
And, speaking of platforms, that's another big reason why it's growing. Platforms like YouTube and even Spotify are prioritizing video content. So that means more discoverability, which is huge for creators.
oh, interesting. So from like a strategy point, if you're a podcaster, it's like you could actually reach more people
Absolutely.
by having the video component.
Yeah, it makes a huge
That's pretty
difference.
compelling.
Yeah, and the article talks about this idea of multimedia appeal. It's not just for audio listeners anymore. You're tapping into this whole huge world of video consumers.
So it's like exponentially, multiplying your reach. But okay, so, obviously video takes more work than just audio.
Right.
So is it worth it?
Yeah, that's the question, right? And this article, doesn't shy away from the challenges, but, there are also these big potential rewards, one of the biggest being, increased revenue potential. Video opens up all sorts of new monetization options, things like ad revenue and sponsorships, even merchandise and, subscription-based content, all that stuff.
So if you're a podcaster and you're looking to, make a living doing it, video could be that thing
For sure.
that pushes you over the edge. Okay, so we've talked about like what video podcasting is, why it's becoming so popular. Now, how do you actually do it? Like if someone is listening to this and they're like, okay, I'm in, but where do I start? What are those first steps?
Well, this article does a really nice job of laying out this roadmap for getting started. And it starts with the foundation, choosing the right platform. There are a few big ones to consider, and they each have like their own pros and cons.
Right. So let's break those down. What are the main ones that we should be thinking about?
Well, YouTube is kind of the obvious giant in the space. They've got the massive user base, awesome discoverability features, and, they have really established ways to make money. But it's not the only option. Spotify is actually making a really big push into video podcasting. So they're definitely one we keep an eye on, especially if you already have, an audio podcast on Spotify.
Okay, so YouTube, if you want reach and monetization,
Yeah,
Spotify, if you're already on there, maybe you're thinking about expanding.
exactly.
Okay. Anything else?
Yeah, if live streaming is part of your plan, then Twitch is a really strong contender. They're known for gaming, but they're really expanding into all kinds of content these days, and podcasts are, a big part of that. And then, of course, you can't forget about social media like Facebook and Instagram. They're all about video these days, and you can really easily take, clips from your video podcast and repurpose them for those platforms.
Oh, right. So you could use those to reach even more people.
Absolutely.
Okay, wow. Lots of options. It's kind of overwhelming.
It is.
How do you pick the right one, though?
Well, I think it really comes down to understanding your audience and what your goals are. Like, are you mostly focused on, getting a ton of views and building a huge following? Or are you more interested in, fostering a really engaged community?
Right.
And I think, the answers to those questions will really help you decide which platform is the right fit.
It's kind of like, picking the right soil for a plant. You got to know what that plant needs to grow, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so you've picked your platform. What's the next step in this roadmap?
So now comes the fun part. This is where you get to decide on what your format is going to be. Tap into your creative side. Think about what kind of video podcast really showcases your personality and your content in the best way. Like, are you a natural storyteller? Do you love being in front of the camera? Or do you prefer something more collaborative, with guests and experts and stuff like that?
It's where your own style kind of gets to come out.
Exactly.
Okay, so it sounds like there's, you can figure out what works best for you
For sure.
and what you enjoy doing.
And the article really encourages people to experiment. Like, don't be afraid to play around with different formats, See what your audience responds to the best. You might even discover some new things about yourself and, like, your creative voice in the process.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool. Okay, so this all sounds great. But, I'm sure there are people out there who are like, video just seems so complicated.
Yeah.
You need all this fancy gear and stuff.
Oh, for sure. A lot of people get intimidated by that aspect of it.
Yeah.
But, we should probably talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah.
Because it might be simpler than they think.
Yeah, let's unpack that a little bit.
Okay.
So what's the actual equipment that you really need to get started?
All right. Well, let's dive into that
Okay.
after the break.
Sounds good. We'll be back in just a minute to talk about the gear that you need to get your video podcast rolling. Okay, so we're back. And before the break, we were talking about how, some people might be a little scared to try video podcasting because they think they need all this, like, expensive equipment and stuff.
Yeah. It's a common worry.
So let's talk about that, because I bet it's actually a lot simpler than people think, right?
Oh, absolutely. I think a lot of people really overestimate what you need to get started.
Mm-hmm.
It's easy to get kind of caught up in like all the fancy tech and stuff, but honestly, you can create a really engaging video podcast with a pretty basic setup.
Okay, so let's break it down. Like, what are the essential pieces of gear that someone would need to get started?
Well, the three main things you'll need are a camera, a microphone, and then some sort of lighting setup.
Okay, makes sense. So let's start with cameras. Now, I know there are a ton of different cameras out there. You've got, like, the DSLRs, the mirrorless cameras, and then you've got, like, just basic webcams.
Right.
How do you know which one's right for you?
Yeah, it really depends on your budget and, how high quality you want things to look. But honestly, if you're just starting out, a good quality webcam can be a great option.
Really?
Yeah, they've come a long way in terms of resolution and all the features they offer, and you can find some really good ones for under $100.
So you don't need to spend, like, thousands of dollars to get something decent.
No, not at all.
What about, like, if you did want to upgrade at some point? What are the advantages of using, like, one of those fancier cameras, like a DSLR or a mirrorless?
Yeah, the main difference is that those dedicated cameras give you a lot more control over the look of your video. Like you can adjust things like aperture, shutter speed, ISO, all those settings that let you fine tune the image.
Okay.
And they also tend to perform better in low light, which can be really helpful if you're not recording in like a perfectly lit studio or something.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So, it's kind of like having more tools in your toolkit to create the exact look you want.
Right, but if you're just starting out, it sounds like a webcam's a great way to kind of dip your toes in the water.
Exactly, yeah. And then you can always upgrade later if you decide to get more serious about it.
All right, so camera check. Next up is audio. Now, we know that good audio is super important for any podcast,
Right.
but would you say it's even more important for video podcasts?
I actually think you could make the argument that it's even more important for video.
Really?
Yeah, because think about it. If you've got amazing video quality, but the audio is all muffled and distorted, people are just going to click away.
Yeah, for sure.
But if the audio is crystal clear, they might be willing to overlook some, minor imperfections in the video.
It's like that saying, people will forgive a bad picture, but they won't forgive bad sound.
Exactly, exactly.
Okay, so what are your top microphone recommendations for video podcasters?
Okay, so a good starting point would be a USB microphone. They're super easy to use, pretty affordable, and you can get surprisingly good sound quality from them. The Blue Yeti is a classic for a reason.
Yeah, I've heard of that one.
It's really versatile, sounds great, and it's got that cool, like, retro design.
It's a good-looking microphone, too.
Right. And if you want something a little more portable, the Rode NT USB Mini is another awesome option.
Okay, cool. What if you want to go, like, full pro?
Yeah, so if you're really serious about audio, then an XLR microphone is the way to go.
Okay.
Now, they do require an audio interface, which adds a little bit of complexity, but they give you a much wider dynamic range and just more flexibility overall in terms of sound shaping.
Okay, so what are some popular XLR microphones that you would recommend?
Well, the Shure SM7B is a super popular choice among podcasters. It has this really rich, warm sound,
Okay.
and it does a fantastic job of rejecting background
Oh,
noise.
that's important.
Yeah, really important. And then, if you're looking for something with a little bit more sparkle and clarity, the Rode Procaster is another excellent option.
All right, so we got cameras, we got microphones. Let's talk lighting now. I've seen some video podcasts where the lighting is just, like, not good,
Oh, yeah?
and it can be really distracting.
It can, for sure.
So what are some simple tips for setting up good lighting for a video podcast?
Yeah, lighting is so important. It can really make or break how your podcast looks. But the good news is you don't need like a fancy studio setup to get good results. Natural light is always the best option if you can get it.
Okay.
So if you have a window, try to position yourself near it, but avoid direct sunlight, which can be a little bit harsh.
So like soft diffused light.
Exactly.
Okay, what if you're recording at night or you just don't have good natural light?
Yeah, then you're going to want to look at artificial lighting, and a single ring light can make a huge difference.
Oh yeah, those are everywhere these days.
They are, and for good reason. They provide this really nice, even illumination, and they eliminate those unflattering shadows that you can get with like overhead lighting.
I see, so it brightens up your face.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. Any other lighting options that you'd recommend?
Yeah, if you want more control over the direction and intensity of the light, you could invest in a couple of softbox lights.
Okay.
They create a really beautiful diffused light that's perfect for video, and you can find affordable kits online that include everything you need.
Awesome. So even with lighting, there are options for every budget.
Absolutely.
Okay, we've covered cameras, microphones, lighting. Now, what about editing software? Do you need to be like a professional video editor to create a decent video podcast?
Oh, no, not at all. There are tons of user-friendly options out there, and a lot of them are even free. For basic editing, iMovie, if you're on a Mac, or Windows Movie Maker are great places to start.
Okay, those are good for beginners.
Yeah, for sure.
What if you want to get a little more advanced, like adding transitions and graphics and stuff like that?
Yeah, so if you're ready to step up your editing game, DaVinci Resolve is a fantastic option. It's professional level software, but it's completely free to use.
Wow, free?
Yeah, it's amazing. And then, if you're willing to pay, Adobe Premiere Pro is kind of the industry standard.
Okay, so no matter your skill level or your budget, there's an editing software out there for you.
For sure.
All right, so we've got all the equipment basics covered. Now let's shift gears and talk about the content itself.
Okay.
Like, what are some key strategies for creating video podcast content that's actually compelling and will keep people engaged?
Yeah, that's where the real magic happens. Let's dive into that.
Okay, so we're back and ready to talk about, the real heart of video podcasting, the content itself.
Yeah, the content's everything, right?
We talked about all the tech stuff, but now let's focus on, what people are actually going to watch.
Exactly. I mean, you can have the best equipment in the world, but if your content isn't good, people aren't going to stick around.
Right. It's all about what you're actually saying and showing. So how do you create video podcast content that actually grabs people's attention and keeps them coming back for more?
Yeah, well, there's no magic formula, but there are some key things you can do.
Okay.
One of the most important is really knowing your audience. Like, who are you trying to reach? What are they interested in? What problems are they trying to solve?
Right. So it's like any kind of communication, you need to understand who you're talking to
Absolutely.
if you want to actually connect with them.
Exactly. And once you have a good understanding of your audience, then you can start brainstorming content ideas that are actually going to resonate with them. Think about the questions they're asking, the challenges they're facing, the things they're passionate about.
So it's about being like a problem solver, a source of information, an authority in your niche, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
What are some like practical ways to come up with content ideas that will grab people's attention?
Well, one thing you can do is look at what's already working in your niche. Like, what are other video podcasts talking about? What are the most popular videos on YouTube in your category?
So it's not about copying. It's about like getting inspiration, seeing what's already resonating
Exactly.
with people. Okay, what else?
And don't be afraid to experiment with different formats. You could do solo episodes where you're sharing your expertise.
Mhm.
You could interview guests, bring in different perspectives, or even do panel discussions to get some debate going.
Oh, that's interesting. So keeping things varied keeps people interested too.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so even if you have great content ideas, you still have to present them in a way that's visually appealing.
Oh, absolutely. Visual storytelling is so important. Think about how you can use visuals to enhance your message. You could use B-roll footage, animations, graphics, screen shares, anything that helps to illustrate your points and keep people visually engaged.
Yeah, it's like adding all this extra spices that make a dish really come alive.
Exactly.
What about pacing? Is that important for video podcasts?
Oh, yeah, definitely. You don't want your video to feel too slow or too rushed. You want to find that sweet spot that keeps people engaged without overwhelming them, like, using jump cuts to get rid of any dead air or awkward pauses.
Mm-hmm.
And, don't be afraid to add some music or sound effects to create a certain mood or energy.
Oh, that's cool. So it's like you're creating an experience for the
Yeah.
viewer. Okay, we've talked about content creation, but what about, the practical side of things, like managing your time? I imagine it's got to be tough to stay organized when you're adding video into the mix.
Oh, for sure. Time management is key. One of the best things you can do is create a production schedule and really stick to it.
Okay.
Block out specific times for brainstorming, recording, editing, promoting, all that stuff.
So you're treating it like a real business, with deadlines and all that.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to batch your work. Like, you could record a bunch of episodes in one day or have a specific day of the week for editing, that kind of thing.
Oh, that's a good tip. Just get it all done at once. Anything else?
And delegate. If you have the budget, outsource things like editing, social media management, even transcription. It can really free up your time so you can focus on the creative stuff.
That makes sense. Work smarter, not harder, right? Okay, before we wrap up, I want to touch on like the legal and ethical stuff with video podcasting.
Okay, sure.
Are there any like special things creators need to be aware of?
Yeah, it's always a good idea to brush up on copyright law, make sure you have the rights to use any music, images, video clips, anything like that you include in your podcast. You can find royalty-free stuff or get permission from the copyright holder.
Right, and always give credit, obviously.
Of course, of course.
What about privacy? Are there any special considerations when you're recording guests or sharing personal stories on video?
Yeah, I think transparency is really important. Always get consent from your guests before you record them.
Mhm.
Let them know how the footage is going to be used, all that. And if you're sharing personal stories, just be mindful of other people's privacy as well.
So just being respectful and responsible.
Exactly.
Okay, awesome. Well, I think we've covered